Now, our next guest might want to have a comment or two about what's going on at the Democrat National Convention, which seems to be, the theme of last night, as I said, first hour, was the beatings will continue until morale improves. And they seem to be presenting a dynamic that is only acceptable to stupid people. Because last night you listened to them talk, and it's as if Joe Biden doesn't exist. It's as if his presidency doesn't exist. It's as if they're campaigning to try to unseat Donald Trump. It's as if they want the American people to believe that Donald Trump is still president of the United States, and the responsibility on the border, on energy crisis and energy policy, on inflation, on American business policy, on foreign entanglements and foreign wars, that none of this lies at the foot of the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration. All that's coming up. More on that in just a moment. We also talk with quite a bit of regularity about the wokeness of the business community in our world these days and in our country these days. And a guy that knows a thing or two about breaking down that wokeness and getting to the heart of the matter. He's done it with a number of different companies, and his recent success involves Harley Davidson, is Robby Starbuck. And Robby joins us on the Matt Murphy Hotline this afternoon. Robby, how are you, friend?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Man, I'm great. Any thought, before we get into Harley D and your recent success, your late, I don't know that I want to call it a pelt, but it's kind of that. It's kind of your latest pelt on your wall. But any thoughts on this DNC? You watching this thing?
I'm trying to avoid it as much as I can. However, it's kind of unavoidable, because there's so many crazy clips that just keep coming up in my feeds. But I actually just posted one that I think is a great explanation of the entire event. It's a DNC speaker at the Black Caucus meeting saying, hey, y'all, we have 70 days. We need to act normal for 70 days, and then after that, we can go back to being crazy. He literally says this, we can go back to being crazy. Okay? That's the entire game plan for the Kamala Harris campaign. Pretend that you're a moderate in some way or that you're normal in some way for the next 70 days. Try to win the election by lying to people, and then go back to being an absolute far-left radical. She's not just a far-left Democrat. This is a woman whose father is a communist, and she was raised by a communist. I want everybody to remember this. He is an unabashed Marxist, and that has major influence on her. She is steering us toward that direction of actual modern communism, not just some, crazy far-left policy. I would honestly say I think she's further left than AOC and Bernie Sanders.
I believe it. I know it's, she said the quiet part out loud, right? Recently, when she came out with her quote unquote economic policy, her economic policy was straight out of Venezuela. These are policies that were tried one time way back in the day in 1971, 1972 with Richard Nixon, and price controls don't work. They've never worked. They've never accomplished the goals that they claim to want to accomplish. What they do accomplish is more government takeover of the private means of production, which is obviously communism or socialism.
Well, they do one really great thing, though, okay? And that's they make hyperinflation happen really fast. that's the one thing that they're fantastic at, price controls. So if you ever just want hyperinflation, that is your answer right there. It's fantastic. There's nothing better at getting that to happen. So, from that vantage point, if that's the goal she has, to turn us into Venezuela, where the citizens are totally subservient to government and dependent on them to even just survive, or else you're stuck eating rats and begging to get into a hospital when you're giving birth and being left outside to die. She's the right person for that type of policy to come to fruition in America.
Robby, let's turn our attention to your effort, your online campaign. Did you know, did this start with Tractor Supply? Was that the first one?
Yep, that was the first one, Tractor Supply. Then we went to John Deere, and then we went to Harley. And so exposing the wokeness at these great American companies, that's how they've always been seen. These are iconic brands, was something that, we felt like was going to resonate with America, not just people who are Republican even. There's a lot of people who don't vote who go into these stores and they vote with their dollars every day, and they oppose all the crazy stuff going on in our country, but maybe are harder to get out to vote on Election Day. And these people, though, they're willing to use their voice and their dollars to send a message. And, when you think about the corporate landscape, people are like, how are you making this change happen? Well, the reality is us getting the word out there has clearly worked, because companies don't just get rid of these far left policies. They're totally dedicated to them. The only reason they got rid of them is because the economic damage that was being done was massive. You know, in the case of Tractor Supply, they lost $3 billion in market cap. That's not like something you sneeze at. This is a company that can't afford to lose $3 billion market cap. So, you know, I think for them, they could see the numbers of people coming into the stores, buying the products dwindling. You know, in Harley's case, they saw at Sturgis, the largest biker rally in America, that their tent was a ghost town. In fact, Bloomberg reported that they closed down their tent 2 days early. So that's a massive embarrassment for the Harley brand, and they had to do this. We forced their hand into it, and we expect to go one by one through these companies. We've identified a great deal of them. And so we just have to go through one by one, exposing them. And I trust the people to use that information wisely to hold these companies accountable and sort of demand that we get some sane places to shop again. And sort of, I think another reason, there's many reasons that this boycott has been successful. I think one is that I'm not demanding purity from people. So not the next company we expose, but the one after that is going to be a massive media story. It's going to be a David versus Goliath fight. And it's important that people understand that we're not asking for purity during it. We're saying, hey, you know, if you need to go to some other company and they happen to have woke policies too, that's fine. We're focused on this one because we need to take back ground. And if we take back this one, then we all suddenly have a place we can go where we don't have to make those compromises anymore.
Okay,
so we're taking this tactically in a way that other people have not.
There's just a tremendous amount to unpack. So I want to start by talking to, you know, Paul and Tracy. These are the people that are listening that have no idea what we're talking about, right? So let's start from the beginning. Was it originally your purpose to take the companies one by one? Was it kind of your design in your head? Or did you become aware of Tractor Supply and some of the wokeness that occurred at corporate, and you're like, well, the people need to know about this because the people walking into Tractor Supply are obviously not people that have succumbed to this woke nonsense, DEI nonsense? Was it just a one by one, or did you, at what point, I guess I'm asking Robby, did you realize, you know what, I can talk about these companies one at a time and make an impact across America as to how these companies do their business and do better business for the people that they serve?
So Tractor Supply is a canary in a coal mine, you know?
Right. Okay.
And it was very meaningful to me because when I had a whistleblower come forward and give me information about them, I realized that myself, I'm very politically, you know, sort of connected to what's going on and everything. And I'm a savvy shopper, and I've got a farm, I've got cattle, I've got chickens. I go to Tractor Supply on a weekly basis with my children, and I had no clue that I was contributing to this problem by shopping there. And so if I didn't know, I was like, then, you know, who does know about this? And so I figure, at that point in time, we're going to do a story about this, but if this is happening at Tractor Supply, then this is probably happening other places. And so we started to pull that thread and look at what are the great American brands that conservatives trust the most, and is this happening there? And without fail, Matt, it is happening at every one of these companies. And so we knew our job at that point was to construct a different way of boycotting this sort of ideology from permeating throughout companies that we give our money to. And so we did that, and we said, what is the number one PR response to a controversy like this? Wait for it to blow over. So we have to design this to never blow over. It has to be a drip, drip, drip approach where it is painful for a long period of time and the companies cannot withstand the PR hit. And then we also have to do it in such a way that we spread the news to the most influential people within that company's core audience. So in the case of, like, say, John Deere, it was your influencer farmers got on board and started spreading the message. In the case of Harley, it was the motorcycle channels who were the big biker influencers. They all got on board. You make it unavoidable for the companies to sort of address what's happening. And so that's what we did, I think, very effectively. And then we also, because this was more coordinated than, say, like Bud Light, in Bud Light's case, yes, we damaged Bud Light's business, but there was not a cohesive, you know, sort of call to action with Bud Light that I think was, you know, sort of an ask that we were making as a movement to them, except for, you know, cut this out very generally. In our case, we've been making very specific asks, and we've been asking people who get engaged with this to send emails, make phone calls, do things, and take action. And that citizen involvement, and we've used a tool called Citizen Caller to do this with one click, has been massive in getting these companies to respond, because you can't ignore when thousands and thousands of people across the country are emailing and calling on a daily basis. It becomes totally unavoidable for the company to just pretend it's not happening.
And while I admit the Harley Davidson piece, it hits a little closer to home because I have a Harley. I ride a Harley. But I also am a little bit more familiar with the business model of Harley Davidson, right? They have dealerships, and so the dealerships oftentimes have precious little to do with the corporate structure, yet there is an impact at the dealership level. I mean, I was talking to some friends at Bumpus Harley Davidson, and they want nothing more than the people to have the freedom to ride, and they don't want anything to do with any of this. I'm not speaking directly for them, but I just generally speaking as I talk to these folks. So, I mean, does it concern you at all, and how does that fit into your approach, recognizing that while you're going after very specific targets, and we all appreciate these targets that you're going after, there might be some residual impact on good Tennesseans that are just trying to get the job done and are working hard for a living and want to sell a good product to fellow Tennesseans?
So I think about, and I take this very seriously because I understand there is a human impact to every single choice that we make with this movement. And so for me, my sort of operating viewpoint, as I go back to something that my great-grandfather kind of drilled into me, you know, he escaped communism in Cuba, came to America, and I don't think I've ever met a more grateful American in my life than my great-grandpa because he knows what the other side of this looked like. And he was one of those people who stood up, who used his voice, who tried to do everything he could to get others to do the same thing before communism took over. And he said the greatest regret of most Cuban refugees is that more people didn't speak up and say something sooner or do something sooner to stop that beast. And, you know, he didn't know the term woke or anything at the time he's saying this, but he was describing policies and changes that today would align with that woke movement. And sort of drilled into me the importance of standing up before it's too late and not waiting until it's too late. And so with this movement, I see very clearly where it's going to go for our children. And if we want our children to live in a country where they can dissent, where they do have a choice, where this is not shoved down their throat at every single turn, we have to be willing to do things that are uncomfortable. And yes, there's going to be negative effects if, say, a corporation has dealerships and then it affects those other people if the corporation doesn't do their job. However, you're also going to see no change in the sort of desire of the market to go and purchase motorcycles. You know, people are still going to want to buy motorcycles. Maybe they want to buy them somewhere else. So what happens then? Well, if, say, Indian Motorcycle, who also changed their policies because of our story, as well as Polaris, you know, if they, by virtue of having come out earlier than Harley, earn new customers, then they're going to need to hire more people. And so I think you're going to see sort of a shift in where jobs are at, number one. But number two, you know, when these companies make a good decision, they do the right thing, my message has always been, don't continue to punish them if they're getting on the right track and they're doing the right thing. The goal of this movement is restoration, not destruction. And that should be the goal for all these great American brands, is to want them to continue to be great American brands. So, you know, it's not lost on me that there can be an effect, but I think in the long term, our sort of calculation is that we're preventing damage that is going to be much worse and much more devastating in the future by standing up now and saying and doing something to stop this ideology in its tracks before it controls the entirety of your life.
No, and I completely support that. At the same, I mean, and I support you. But, you know, part of my job is to ask sort of the more difficult questions too, Robby. So how do you respond to people that say, well, you're costing me my job? And I have nothing, I have nothing to do with what the decision-making policies are at the corporate level. How do you respond to that?
To be perfectly honest, nobody's come to me and said that. I've talked to dealers all over the country, and with the exception of one, they've been generally supportive, or at least said they understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And the only one that disagreed is this dealership in Vermont, who they're like kind of Bernie Sanders people.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but
so,
yeah. Say no more. You said Vermont, and I, you know, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, you know, you're from Vermont, I get it. You know, so, but with other folks, I haven't had anybody come to me and say that. You know, if they did, then probably what I would do is endeavor to try to help them find an alternative, you know, and find, you know, somewhere else. And, you know, I think that ultimately all the more reason, especially with public companies that we're going after, to be able to make the argument that the companies themselves are not acting in the fiduciary interests of the shareholders, which is in itself a legal issue for the board members. So if board members are making a calculation that they're going to be adherent to this left-wing ideology at the cost of their employees and their bottom line, that's a big problem in a public company. And so there's going to be shareholder lawsuits in some of these cases because shareholders want to ensure that boards are always acting in their interests, to ensure the bottom line is always the best it can be. So I think that's going to self-correct on its own as a byproduct of shareholders wanting to make the most money. Mm-hmm. But, in the interim, if that were to happen to somebody and they reached out to us, we would try to help them.
Robby Starbuck is our guest. Robby, if you have a couple of extra minutes, a lot of folks on the membersnutrition.com super text line have suggestions or questions, and I want to wrap up by asking you what is next. What decisions Harley-Davidson has made, as John Deere did, as Tractor Supply did, and what might be next. Robby Starbuck is with us. It is the Matt Murphy Radio Show. Robby Starbuck is with us for a few more moments. Now, Robby, the success is obvious to me. For those who follow you on social media platforms like the X Machine, we've been watching these successes. For me, it's a little bit different, and you can tell me where you think I'm wrong, but I think it just shows you how shallow the effort on the part of these corporations truly are to present these DEI presentations and to present this thin veneer of following the quote-unquote rules of the woke world, in as much as, and I understand the pressure is real, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from that, but the simplicity by which they say, okay, you win, you're right, we're going to throw all of these things down the proverbial toilet. I mean, I think that shows the success of the groups that follow you. It shows the success of the organization of your campaign, but it also shows the ridiculousness of this DEI woke model to begin with, does it not?
Well, it does a couple things. So I would say that it could look like that from the outside, but to be perfectly honest, if people kind of looked at the sort of details under the hood here, it is actually really hard to get these companies to do this. People have been trying to expose these companies for a long time, and I think the difference maker has been the scale at which we're able to do it, the sort of organization we have, but beyond that, it's been the nature of how long this goes on. So in Tractor Supply's case, it took 3 weeks to get them to change course. In John Deere's, it took them about 3 weeks, and in the case of Harley-Davidson, it took about 3.5 weeks, okay? So that's not like a small bit of time where they just turned around and rolled over right away. This was a sustained pressure campaign where up to the last day of the Harley campaign before they changed their tune, there were actually more emails and phone calls made on the last day of the campaign than there were on the first, when the first video went viral with 3 million views in that 24-hour period. So we ramped up as we went on instead of waning, and so same thing with the national media exposure of what we were doing. We kind of do the same thing. We agree to interviews or agree to do stuff where they expose what we're doing, but we do it on our timetable. Now, the secondary part of this that is important is that what it really exposes is just how sort of flimsy this stuff is ideologically. Mm-hmm. Because if this had any popular support pushing back, it would be much harder for these companies. Right. The truth is that, like, if you are able to put together a large group of consumers and really push back against this stuff, it is going to fall as long as you do it for a sustained time period. And so, these companies are primed for this. Number one, a lot of these companies bought in on this from something called, McKinsey did this report. So it's a McKinsey report. They did it and essentially made the argument to corporations that you're going to be rich if you adopt DEI. It's going to make you so much more money, and this is a no-brainer, right? So Wall Street Journal, the same day they did a profile on me, they also came out with an exclusive that showed that entire report that was made about 6-7 years ago was a farce. It was based on faulty studies. It was based on surveys that were not accurate, and the whole thing was not true, essentially. It was just completely made up in many cases. And that when you really look at the end economic, outcomes of DEI programs, you see failure everywhere you turn. So like in London on their stock exchange, they have a diversity ETF, which is basically, for people who don't follow stocks, it's like you combine all of the biggest stocks that are dedicated to diversity and equity and inclusion. And that portfolio, that ETF, it underperforms every other ETF by a massive margin. So that's one metric of many that they name in this Wall Street Journal piece to sort of expose the entirety of the sales pitch for DEI as a farce. It's not going to make you more money. It's going to cause division and fights in the workplace. And the truth is, even some people who I know are really well-meaning people and maybe don't understand how DEI is a Trojan horse for left-wing politics, they hear DEI and they think, well, I want to treat people, equal, and I want to be including everybody around me. I'm just a nice person. It's a Christian thing to do. And the truth is they've got to understand that in Marxism, the intent from the very beginning is to twist language to their own purposes. They don't actually mean diversity, inclusion, or equality, because equality is not even in there. It's equity, and equity is a Marxist term that essentially means we are going to take from others and give to people.
Right. It demands equal outcomes. No question.
Exactly, and it's
right.
It's the enemy of excellence.
Right.
And then diversity is really division, because there's no diversity of thought in any of these corporations, and there's certainly no inclusion of conservatives in the office, but there's plenty of, sort of inclusion of the left-wing orthodoxy among the far-left employees.
All right, so only about a minute left. Robbie, what's your message to people who are like, okay, now that the companies have acquiesced to kind of getting right on the corporate level, what's your message to folks who are saying, well, should I shop Tractor Supply again, according to Robby Starbuck, John Deere again, Harley Davidson again? Or are we all good there? And what's next down the road for Robby Starbuck in terms of exposing some of these companies?
So we take these on a case-by-case basis. Number one, very important that I say I never will accept money from any of these companies or any competing company as a way of, sort of running this thing. Like, that's not what we're about. So when I say this, I mean it genuinely. In Tractor Supply's case, yes, go back to Tractor Supply, reward what they did. They did the best turnaround of any of these companies. They are the model for what companies should do. And I know from our sources at corporate there that it is a world different now. It is so much more, it's a better environment for everybody. And so we want to build that at other companies and reward it when they do the right thing. In John Deere's case, no. John Deere was what I would consider a half win, because we got them to promise they would stop funding pride events, they would stop funding LGBTQ plus trainings and things like that. They would end all woke trainings and stop with the weird transgender, training videos on letting men go into the bathroom and things like that. So they stopped a number of things. However, they did not get rid of their entire DEI department like Tractor Supply did. And they did fire their global head of DEI, which I assume is because that person probably was responsible for a lot of the craziest stuff we exposed that John Deere was doing. However, they still have a DEI department. So they're still sort of dedicated to some of the tenets of this, even if they're getting away from some of the more objectionable stuff. So in John Deere's case, I would actually say no. They need to see the outcome of doing a half measure, which I think is not enough. And in the case of, Harley Davidson, I'm going to say, I'm going to leave that one to bikers, because I'm happy with the changes we extracted. However, I think that the CEO is a little different than the CEOs at John Deere and at Tractor Supply, because he is a true believer in this ideology. And so without him being fired, you really have to wonder how committed they are to change. And I think that, maybe he resigns, because from what my sources have told me, this was a board-led decision to release the statement and change policy, and that he was against it. And so maybe he leaves. And if that happens, I would say, full-throatedly, yes, go back. Now, I don't want to hurt dealers, so I'm going to leave that one to bikers in general, because, say, here in Williamson County, we have a great dealership.
I'll say this: the dealerships that I've talked to, and I'm a little more intimately involved on the Harley side than I am on the others. They don't care for their CEO either. I mean, they don't. Yeah. They would absolutely love a change. I'm sorry to do it, but I got to leave it there. What a great half hour, Robbie. Thank you for spending time. Thank you for doing what you do, and we appreciate the fact that you're willing to come on and explain it all to the listening audience. God bless you, and we look forward to the next adventure, man.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.
Yep. Take care.